The 1996 Aksu Tarim prison escape and terrorist attack case. Part 1. This case happened on July 15, 1996, and it has been 24 years now. To be honest, the concept of time in my personal world seems to have stood still. Whenever I think about things from the 1990s, it feels like they happened just yesterday. I don't know why, but I always feel like my time hasn't moved forward. So, when I think about this incident from more than 20 years ago, it really feels like yesterday. The case we're talking about today took place in Shoyang County, Aksu, Xinjiang. I went to Shoyang County in 1998, but it was just a passing visit. My memory of Shoyang County is vague, but I remember it had vast stretches of poplar forests, which were very famous and spectacular. Well, I'm very familiar with Aksu. Aksu is located in the midwestern part of Xinjiang, at the foot of the Tian Shan Mountains, and bordered by the Taklamakan Desert to the south. It also shares borders with Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. The scenery here is beautiful actually. Xinjiang has the most beautiful scenery in China. Shoyang County lies within the Taklamakan Desert. The case we discussing today is a major prison escape and when people hear about prison escapes, they usually think of riots inside the prison. But this incident didn't happen inside the prison. It occurred outside, though it was still a prisoner escape and riot. Before talking about the case, let me introduce Shoyang County's prison in detail. This prison in Shoyang County is called Tarim Prison, a very well-known prison in the entire Aksu area, and it's extremely large. There are hundreds of prisoners detained here. Most of them are Uyghurs, along with Kazakhs, Han Chinese, and other ethnic minorities, though Uyghurs make up the majority, as over 80% of Shoyang County's population is Uyghur. Despite its large size, the prison is divided into squadrons for easier management, such as Squadron 1, Squadron 2, and Squadron 3, with nearly 100 prisoners per squadron. Although each squadron lives in the same large prison, they are isolated from each other and never see one another. It's impossible to manage hundreds of prisoners together, so they are separated. Each squadron operates independently, even when working outside. Due to the vast land and sparse population of Xinjiang and Qinghai in China, there are many prisons, especially in western Qinghai. Some of the most famous prisons in Qinghai include Tanggula Mountain Prison, Huang Prison, and the former Xiangrai Farm in Haishi Prefecture. These prisons are all very well known. Xiangrai Farm may no longer exist today, but Tanggula Mountain Prison is still operational. I'm very familiar with Tanggula Mountain Prison. Many brothers from Hutai Mountain have served sentences there. Between 1987 and 1989, I went to Tanggula Mountain Prison more than 100 times from Xining, all to visit our brothers from Hutai Mountain. Adding trips to Huang Prison, the total number of visits easily exceeded Ibai. I can't remember exactly how many kilometers it is from Xining to Tanggula Mountain, but it's less than 200 kilometers. Back then, there were no highways, so the bus ride took a whole day, which was extremely tiring. So, Qinghai has always had many prisons. Even more in the 1960s and 1970s. Later, prisons gradually moved towards centralized management. Small prisons were closed down and merged into several large prisons, just like the merger of universities. The same happened in Xinjiang. Prisons are different from detention centers. Detention centers hold suspects awaiting trial before they are sent to prisons, while prisons are labor reform farms. Functions of prisoners vary across different prisons. Some prisons specialize in making quilts and bedding. Others, like large prisons in inland areas such as Beijing, produce sweaters or take orders for children's clothing. Prisons in Qinghai and Xinjiang are different. They focus on agricultural activities. Prisons in Qinghai grow crops, mainly wheat, and Hualong Prison is famous for wheat farming. Prisons in Xinjiang, on the other hand, focus on cotton harvesting, given Xinjiang's renowned cotton production. Tarim Prison's main work is cotton planting and harvesting. In winter, due to the extreme cold, prisoners usually do light odd jobs, such as odd labor or reservoir repairs, which are not very strenuous. In spring, they start sowing cotton, and in summer, they begin harvesting cotton. Harvesting is extremely hard work. So, the prisoners at Tarim Prison mainly engage in cotton planting and harvesting. The way prisoners work outside is similar across prisons nationwide. I'm very familiar with prisoners' labor routines because every time I went to Tangula Mountain Prison, the bus ride took a whole day, and it would be dark by the time I arrived. So I couldn't return the same day. I usually stayed at guest houses near the prison, which were specially set up for family members of prisoners. I stayed for 3 to 4 days each time, waiting for the prisoners to finish work so I could deliver cigarettes and food to my brothers and chat with them in the prison's reception room. This is how they went to work, every morning. Each squadron lined up outside the prison walls, gathered, and then walked to the work site. On foot, usually about 2 to 3 kilometers away. It's actually quite a long walk, and they marched while shouting revolutionary slogans and singing revolutionary songs, something I always found strange. The songs these prisoners sang were the same ones sung by soldiers and civilians, full of vigor and vitality. I often wondered, they're prisoners, so how can they sing such songs? Yet they did songs like the successors of communism. Sometimes it felt ridiculous calling themselves successors of communism, yet singing so enthusiastically and solemnly. You may have never seen such a scene, but I have. They sang with great energy and dedication. They marched in formation to the work site like this. Usually, the team was led by prison guards. 2 per squadron, unarmed and escorted by 4 armed police officers, who herded them like sheep. Each of the 4 armed police officers carried an automatic rifle, submachine gun, fully loaded with 38 bullets. These were real weapons, not for show. 2 armed police officers led the way at the front, carrying submachine guns, while the other 2 guarded the rear. The 2 prison guards stood on either side of the formation, forming an encirclement as the entire team marched forward. Upon arriving at the work site, they started working. The armed police would then draw warning line on the ground with a stick. If conditions allowed, they used lime, otherwise just a stick. Warning line marked the boundary that no prisoner was allowed to cross. Anyone who crossed it would first be warned with a shot in the air. If they still refused to obey, they would be shot on the spot. This was no joke. Prisoners were regarded as enemies of the people, and lethal force could be used against them. If you dared to step over the warning line, you could be shot and killed without any liability. So, basically, no one dared to cross that line. They followed the rules strictly. The prisoners had already eaten breakfast in the prison before going out in the morning. At noon, around 12 o'clock, they took a break to eat, but they didn't return to the prison. The 3-kilometer walk back would be too far and a waste of time. Instead, other prisoners delivered lunch to the work site. The meal break was only 30 minutes, enough time to eat and rest. No more. Forget about taking a nap. You're there to work, not relax. They had to get back to work immediately after eating. Some might ask, how was the food? It was decent, since the prisoners did heavy physical labor. Even cotton picking is hard work. They couldn't be left hungry, otherwise, they wouldn't be able to work. So the food was okay, with meat, and steamed buns were unlimited. They could eat their fill. Unlike detention centers, where food was scarce because prisoners didn't work. So after the 30-minute lunch break, they worked until 5:30 p.m. 早上6点. He harvested cotton was taken away by others, and then the prisoners lined up again, singing revolutionary songs back to the prison. Very ridiculous. That's roughly the daily life of prisoners in the prison. This routine remained unchanged for years. If a prisoner was sentenced to 20 years, they would live this same life every day for 20 years. Think how terrifying and boring that is. Let's talk more about Tarim prison, which had many squadrons. Squadron E had about 100 prisoners, including a terrorist who was once a leader of an extremist organization. His name was July15. In 1993 and 1994, July15 went to Afghanistan, joined the Taliban, received training there, and later returned to Aksu to carry out terrorist activities. He was eventually captured. His crimes may not have been the most serious, so he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. A 25-year sentence is even worse than life imprisonment, as life can be commuted. He was 38 years old at the time and detained in Tarim prison, with no accomplices in his squadron. Extremist terrorists like him are separated from their accomplices and not held in the same squadron to prevent trouble. According to official statements, July15 had extremely reactionary ideas, filled with extremist ideology. Topics related to Xinjiang are very sensitive. People like July15 inherently believed that Xinjiang belonged to them, refused to submit to Communist Party rule, and advocated for independence. They were separatists. Of course, our government will never allow separatism. This is unquestionable, and it's a fact that every separatist riot is firmly suppressed. July15 was imprisoned in 1995. No matter how arrogant he was, he had to serve his sentence honestly and wait 25 years to be released, if he ever was. At 38 years old, July15 was very unruly. Locked up in prison, he spent every day thinking about how to survive 25 years and how to escape. He also realized that spreading the extremist ideology he learned from the Taliban in the prison wouldn't be practical, he couldn't be sure others would listen to him. So he began looking for people in his squadron who would join him in escaping, or at least in doing something to get out. First, he targeted heavy criminals, those sentenced to more than 15 years. Tarim prison was unusual in that it held both short-term and long-term prisoners. Unlike Qinghai's Tangula Mountain Prison or Huang Prison, which specialized in long-term prisoners, all sentenced to more than 10 years, with short-term prisoners held in small prisons like Xining's Brick and Tile Factory, Tarim prison mixed sentence lengths. So, after making up his mind, Malamati started investigating his fellow prisoners. Living and eating together in the same squadron, it was easy for him to ask around. He found out what everyone had done and how long their sentences were, gathering all the information he needed. Then there was a prisoner named Ados Turkson in the same squadron. He got along well with Malamati and they often chatted. Turkson was a murderer. He killed someone in 1994, was sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve, which was later commuted to life imprisonment. A prisoner like him would have to serve at least 15 years before being released. Turkson was very violent in prison, constantly causing trouble, and always talking about wanting to die together. With the prison he was arrogant and refused to obey management. Malamati first recruited Turkson, who immediately agreed after hearing his plan. Okay, brother, I'm with you. Two then started recruiting accomplices separately. 2 people working together are better than one. Had been in prison longer than Malamati, so they quickly recruited 10 more heavy criminals, all sentenced to more than 15 years, even 15 to 20 years. What were they planning? They held meetings every day. Some might guess they wanted to escape, but prisoners in inland prisons usually escape because they can't stand the hardship and crave freedom. They want to hide and live a comfortable life, avoiding further suffering. That's the case for most escapees. But Turkson and his group were different. They were extremist terrorists, unlike ordinary criminals. They didn't escape to pursue freedom, hide in inland areas, live as fugitives, or start a family someday. Their goal was to riot and rebel. Unite 10 people to storm the prison, kill all the guards, rush out to destroy Shuang County's Armed Forces Department and the county's armed police squadron, occupy the county government, and join forces with local extremist forces to take control of Aksu. If they failed, they didn't care. Death was acceptable. So their motives were completely different from those of inland prisoners. Now, among the 98 prisoners in Squadron 1, these 12 heavy criminals colluded closely, determined to riot and rebel. But rioting was no easy task. The armed police had submachine guns, and in Xinjiang, armed police always kept their automatic rifles fully loaded. Rioting would only result in being gunned down. Malamati and Turkson were aware of this, so they needed to find a loophole. Humans are thoughtful and can use their brains. They began figuring out how to escape. It was around the beginning of 1996, still winter. There was little work in winter. Prisoners only did light odd jobs like repairing reservoirs, making it hard to act. Every time they went out, there were 4 armed police officers and 2 prison guards. The guards were unarmed and negligible. But the armed police had fully loaded submachine guns, ready to shoot at the slightest sign of trouble. What could they do? They thought, in spring, they would plant cotton, and the work area was fixed. They did the same work every year. They found a loophole when returning to the prison after planting cotton in spring. They took the same route every day. In spring, the poplar forest leaves hadn't fully grown yet, almost like winter, especially in Xinjiang, where leaves grow slowly. Mayomati suggested waiting until summer, when the poplar forest leaves were lush and dense, to act. He said, first, we need to take care of the 4 armed police with guns. We have sharp people. 3 against 1 armed police officer. We'll seize their guns and kill them. That's manageable. But the hard part is acting in unison. If any group is slow and fails to subdue their target, even 1 armed police officer left standing will gun us all down. How can we ensure success? They noticed a phenomenon. On the way back to the prison from the cotton fields, they passed through a poplar forest and had to make a 90-degree turn. When turning, the front and rear of the long prisoner formation couldn't see each other. This would make it easy to act. 6 people would take care of the 2 armed police at the rear, and 6 at the front, with neither group seeing the other. This was the safest plan, and it made sense. But it wasn't spring yet. They had to wait until summer to carry it out. They endured half a year of waiting for this plan. During these 6 months, Mayomati told the group to lull the armed police and prison guards into complacency. We must not cause trouble in the prison. We must work actively and pretend to be model prisoners. Turkson, who had always been troublemaking and bad-tempered, made a 180-degree turn. He stopped causing trouble and suddenly became a model prisoner, rushing to do dirty and tiring work. The prison guards were shocked and thought, wow, the party's policies are effective, and our ideological education has worked. They were delighted. Believing they had reformed a heinous criminal into an aspiring, progressive prisoner, they didn't pay any further attention. The armed police guarding the prisoners were also complacent. Tarim prison had never had a riot before and had even been rated a model prison. Rioting was the last thing on their minds, so they let their guard down. Days passed, spring sowing ended, and cotton matured. It was July 1996. Mayomati had contacts outside the prison. While pretending to be model prisoners, they secretly prepared for their plan. During these 6 months, Mayomati colluded with external extremists, who smuggled 4 sharp Yinjisha knives into the prison. Yinjisha knives from Xinjiang are very famous and of high quality. Yinjisha is in southern Xinjiang, a place I've also visited and really liked. Since the prison held heavy criminals, the armed police conducted irregular searches of the prison facilities to check for hidden dangerous items. So the prisoners became clever. After smuggling in the 4 knives, they tied strings to them and lowered them into the pit of the squat toilet, where they couldn't be found. The prison facilities were simple, unlike at home. There was nowhere to hide things, no cabinets to rummage through. I once talked about the Wei Shenhai case. Do you remember? Wei Shenhai found a tiger clamp in the detention center and hid it by tying a string to it and lowering it into the toilet pit. They did the same with the 4 knives. leaving them there until July 14th. On July 14th, they decided the time was right. The poplar forest was lush, and none of the 12 had wavered in their resolve. That night, they held a meeting and decided to act on the afternoon of July 15th, on the way back to the prison after work. On the morning of July 15th, as usual, the prisoners gathered for breakfast, lined up outside the prison, sang revolutionary songs and shouted slogans, and marched to the cotton fields. After a day of hard work, they finished at 5:20 p.m. and lined up to return. When they reached the big bend in the poplar forest, the front of the line turned, while the rear was still moving forward. Earlier that night, July 14th, they had retrieved the 4 knives, cleaned them, and distributed them to 4 trusted attackers, assigning tasks. At the bend with the front of the line turned and the rear still following, Malamati shouted, "Attack!" in Uyghur, and the action began quickly. The 2 armed police officers at the front, who had turned the bend, were carrying Type 81 automatic rifles, the same type I've mentioned before, which can change magazines with one hand, was the best rifle at the time, holding 30 bullets, capable of single shot or full auto fire, and foldable. Bai Bashan, a famous criminal, also used this type of rifle. Be honest, the armed police and prison guards had very boring jobs watching prisoners. Work all day was tedious. When returning from work, some armed police even chatted and laughed with the prisoners, getting along quite well. They were all young, after all, and didn't take the prisoners as serious threats. Upon hearing Malamati's order, the 6 prisoners at the front, armed with knives, immediately approached the 2 armed police officers, suddenly stabbing them in the waist, chest, and neck. They stabbed the 2 armed police to death in just tens of seconds, quickly seizing their Type 81 automatic rifles. The group at the rear acted simultaneously, killing the other 2 armed police officers in tens of seconds and seizing their guns. How many bullets did they get with the 4 guns? A total of 158 rounds. One of the armed police officers had an extra magazine in his pocket, 38 rounds per magazine, so 5 magazines made 158 rounds, more than enough. The attack was sudden and fast. The remaining 80-odd prisoners were stunned, terrified, and didn't know what to do. Malamati then picked up a submachine gun, pointed it at the 80 prisoners, and said, "Now I announce you must join our extremist organization and follow us to Shoyang County to storm the armed police squadron and the county government. Will you join us?" None of the 80 prisoners responded. Extreme rioters are always a minority. It was impossible for 80 people to riot together, too hard to control. One young man even said to Malamati, "Malamati, rebellion will send you to hell, to the fire pit." Enraged, Malamati immediately pulled the trigger, blowing the young man's brains out. Yelling, "Fuck you, shut up!" he killed the young man on the spot. When I read about this in the article, I noticed something interesting. The author commented that Malamati was utterly insane for killing his own compatriots. I've always found this confusing. He was a terrorist. If you refused to obey him, wouldn't he kill you? Of course he would. There's no such thing as compatriots at a time like that. I've talked about many cases before, like Yang Shuming, Yang Dehai, and Jiawenge, but none of the authors ever said, these people are utterly insane for killing their own compatriots. I've never seen that sentence. So I'm confused, young Shuming. And the others only killed Han people, they never killed a single ethnic minority. After killing the young man, Malamati and the other three pointed their submachine guns at the crowd and asked again if anyone would join. The prisoners still remained silent, refusing. Many of them, though serving long sentences, were nearly done. Some had served 15 years, and some even had only a few months left before release. Who would join them? Several prisoners even begged, "Don't do this, you'll go to hell. Put down your weapons now, and it's not too late." Another young man said, "I won't join. I'll be released in 2 months. I want to go home. My wife is waiting for me." Who would join you? Only idiots would. Malamati and his group shot him dead on the spot, shouting, "Fuck you, go home. You'll never go home."